And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. The webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub, so look out for that email. I'm very happy to introduce our Heroes Fellows today. Karen Ford Jackson is a grants and resource development professional with experience supporting federally funded education, innovation, and community development programs. She has held roles with the U.S. Department of Education as a management and program analyst, where she has provided guidance to grant oversight, technical assistance, data-informed support to strengthen program performance, compliance, and strategic impact. Dr. Chaz Gibson is a national grants leader and scholar practitioner who has overseen large-scale discretionary grant programs serving hundreds of colleges and universities nationwide, advancing student access and success in STEM and high-needs disciplines. His leadership spans federal grant monitoring, peer review oversight, technical assistance, and data-informed performance improvement. Dr. Gibson holds a PhD in communication, along with a master's in education leadership and policy studies from Howard University. He also earned a Master of Divinity in Counseling from Virginia Union University, a BA in Sociology and Public Health Sciences from Morehouse College, and he completed a postdoctoral fellowship at American University's School of Education. And Dr. Joseph Isaac has spent the past 20 years as a STEM educator, ambassador, and connector among underrepresented populations and communities, both domestically and globally. His experience includes previous roles at the National Science Foundation, the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship, Education Development Center, District of Columbia Public Schools, and Howard University. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to our presenters today.
Hello and welcome, and thanks again for that great introduction, Christine. Today, you all will learn, we will explain how STEM design, project-based and problem-based learning, and higher education preparation intersect to support authentic K through 12 learning. We will help identify practical strategies for incorporating STEM design and PBL into classroom practice. We will describe how inquiry-driven interdisciplinary approaches foster critical thinking, collaboration, and innovation. Next slide, please. So, why STEM design, PBL, and higher education preparation? So, in today's society, modern demands require inquiry-driven, interdisciplinary learning, authentic student-centered approaches that cultivate critical thinking, collaboration, and innovation. Higher ed preparation is essential to scale quality STEM instruction across K-12. The impact is vast. Next slide, please. So, which skill, now we have a poll, which skill do you value most in STEM learning today?
And I will run the Menti if I can have share privileges, Joseph. You can use your phone to scan that QR code to enter the Menti poll or use those digits when you go to the menti.com website.
All great answers.
Yes, they are excellent answers.
And just so you know, someone put in the Q&A critical thinking.
Okay.
Okay.
Just let me know when you're ready to move on, or we can talk about some of these responses.
So let's talk about some of the responses. I'm seeing observation, curiosity, collaboration, listening, intellectual humility, comprehension, resilience, perseverance, self-efficacy, creativity, interest inquiry, conceptual pattern recognition, applicability. And these are all skills that tie into STEM. And throughout this presentation, and we will stop our poll and oh, and move on. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for participating. Next slide, please. So, what is STEM design? Excuse me, STEM design, it integrates science, technology, engineering, and math through inquiry and iteration. So, what does that look like? That approach is driving questions, gathering evidence, using data to make decisions. It's building, it's analyzing. An example of an activity under that lens would be build a weather station and analyze the climate data. That's an activity that can be done with students. Another activity is a smart irrigation for a school garden, a Terragon ecosystem where you collect data and do data logging would be examples of what that looks like. The next one uses the engineering design process or designs thinking cycles to structure projects. What does that look like? A water filtration challenge, which could include part of the STEM elements. Science would be the water quality. Technology could be the sensory and the probing of that activity. Engineering could be the prototype and the designing of the project. The math could be the data analysis and collecting the data and sharing that data out. Emphasizing authentic problems, student questions, and iterative refinement. What does that look like? You tie it to real world needs and community concerns or actual stakeholders. Students can explore and refine the problems and take ownership of that. They can funnel this through planning, testing, and feedback with improvement of systems, coming up with solutions and evidence for inquiry, creating data logs, being informative and then providing the information that was collected for them to share out with the stakeholders if they're doing a problem solving activity. And I will move to the next slide and I will turn it over to Joseph.
Okay, so to sort of piggyback on what was previously said, we're going to drill down a little deeper into um, some of these points. And my first point is one of my favorite points, and that's PBL. And people will ask what PBL means, and it depends on who you're asking, because some people will say project-based learning, some people will say problem-based learning, and so I use this example because the acronyms are so same or so similar, but there are some differences. There's some salient differences. And one of my favorite terms is same but different. It's a phrase used to describe two or more things that are very similar yet not quite identical. And I call project based and problem based learning the kissing cousins of learning models. So both have roots in inquiry-based learning. We'll talk about that in a minute. Um, Both involve students investigating and responding to real-world problems, and both emphasize collaboration, communication, and reflection. Now, looking at some of the origins of the two, um, you could, looking at literature and you could go back to Confucius and Aristotle when we're talking about the earliest examples of learning by doing. And then obviously you can look at the example of Maria Montessori, who used learning through exploration. The project method, which was published by William Kilpatrick over 100 years ago, was really kind of the first mention of project, of that, using that word project. And then it initially applied to agriculture and industrial arts education. So that's project-based learning. Problem-based learning, those origins are a little more recent, and they can actually be traced in back to 1969 at a medical school in Canada. All right. There was a group of doctors that said, hey, you know what? Our students they're getting tired of these lectures. We need a new way to reach them, to not only make doctors but to make healers. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? And so what they did is they created this new learning model using real world problems and situations in the medical field to engage their students. It caught on like wildfire throughout academia, and then probably a few years later, it was around the mid 70s. It was then adopted by K through 12 environments. And so if you know anything about me, I'm a big Venn diagram guy. All right. And so just to look at the the similarities and differences between problem-based and project-based. And this is not to say, this is, I literally just told my students this a few weeks ago. This is not to say one is better than the other. They are situation dependent. But when we look at project-based learning, we're usually talking about a longer time frame, 1 to 4 weeks. And we're usually talking about students aiming to create a product or a final presentation, something tangible, something like real world, put your fingers on, some type of machinery or that's probably not the best example, but um, anything that is community collaborative. Obviously, students are working in collaborative groups. They aiming to make real world impact. Whereas a problem-based learning time frame is usually shorter, probably about 2 to 5 days. Students look at a variety of solutions, and problem-based learning aims to create more of a process instead of a product. All right. And once again, there's not one that's better than the other. They are both viable and valuable education-based learning models. And both involve solving real world problems, and both are cross-disciplinary and heavy on skill building. So remember a couple of slides back, I said we would get into inquiry-based learning because inquiry-based learning is sort of like the umbrella where project-based and problem-based learning reside. And once again, I love a good Venn diagram. This one shows the intersection of inquiry-based learning. So inquiry-based learning is always student-centered. It's always active learning, rarely passive learning. um, Contrast with more traditional rote education learning. What one of my former principals used to tell me, uh, inquiry-based learning involves being the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. Okay, so teachers take a step back. They are more in terms of a facilitator, and where student learning is directed. And some of the steps of the inquiry-based learning process is ask, investigate, create, build, discuss, share, and then reflect. And if you look at those 5 steps, they both fall directly in line with problem-based and project-based learning. And so the roots of inquiry-based is rooted in the Socratic method. Is founded in constructivism. Using the theories of excuse me, Piaget and Vygotsky, and so it provides this educational shift from memorization to innovation and application.
Thank you, Joseph, for that. Um, so I'm going to transition just slightly and bring in a higher ed perspective. My work, I guess, as a P20 scholar and practitioner, that means I think intentionally about the entire educational continuum from early childhood education all the way through higher ed education all the way through workforce preparation. So I spent a great deal, and over the years, through my studies and my teaching and my research, I've spent a great deal considering how K-12 schools, how colleges, universities, how teacher preparation programs, how leadership development and educational policy and workforce readiness all connect together. So part of that was in some of my postdoc work at American University. And so when we come to a major conclusion, I arrive at this. We cannot expect future-ready K-12 classrooms if we are not preparing future-ready educators. I'm gonna say that again. We cannot expect future-ready K-12 classrooms if we are not preparing future-ready educators. The innovation or the innovative classrooms that we hope to see tomorrow must first be modeled in spaces where teachers already see themselves and are trained today. Um, and if we want classrooms to be centered around inquiry, collaboration, innovation, and real world problem solving, then colleges and university and the entire higher ed space, particularly schools of education, etc., must intentionally prepare educators to facilitate those experiences effectively. So going into this, when conversations about educational innovation take place, we often focus primarily on what happens inside the K-12 classroom. But in reality, those classrooms are heavily shaped by decisions made in higher education. For example, higher education institutions prepare future teachers. Higher education institutions develop principals and instructional leaders. Higher educational institutions, they influence curriculum and framework. And more importantly, higher educational institutions shape educational research, pedagogy, and policy implementation. So, in many ways, higher education functions as the training ground for the future of K-12 education. However, one of the tensions we continue to see is that many teacher preparation systems still operate through traditional instructional models that do not fully align with the demands of modern learning environments. They're too often future educators are prepared through lecture-heavy instruction, passive learning environments, compliance-driven assignments, fragmented content areas, limited opportunities for authentic application. Then we ask those same educators after they graduate to enter into a K-12 school and suddenly create collaborative, inquiry-driven, STEM-rich classrooms. Then there is a clear disconnect. So, for example, imagine a teacher candidate spending 4 years primarily completing written discussion boards, textbook readings, and multiple choice assessments. Then, on day one of teaching, we expect them to facilitate interdisciplinary engineering challenges or collaborative learning teams and student centered inquiry projects. Those transitions become difficult when they themselves have not experienced those learning environments. And so this is why higher education is so important. And this is why higher education must move beyond simply discussing innovation theoretically and begin modeling innovation more structurally and instructionally. Next slide. Next slide here, we talk about reimagining teacher preparation programs. So one of the most important shifts that we must make involves reimagining teacher preparation itself. Future educators must do more than study the pedagogy. It's kind of similar to what I just stated a moment ago in the last slide, but they must do more than study pedagogy. They must experience transformative learning environments firsthand. Teachers' preparation programs should be very intentional about the immersion of future educators in certain things such as inquiry-based instruction, STEM integration, uh, design thinking, uh, collaborative problem solving, community engaged learning, and authentic project development. So, for example, instead of assigning future teachers a traditional paper on classroom engagement, imagine asking them to work collaboratively with a local school to design a STEM-based literacy intervention for elementary students. Or now that assignment becomes really authentic, it becomes interdisciplinary, it becomes community connected. Another example could involve teacher candidates partnering with middle school students to co-design sustainability projects around food insecurity, around recycling, and energy efficiency within their communities. Now, those experiences are now preparing educators to think beyond isolated lesson planning and toward transformational learning design. See, future educators also need more opportunities to practice facilitating collaboration, practice managing inquiry-driven classrooms, practice assessing authentic learning, practice encouraging student voice, and supporting productive struggle and revision. And that last point is important because in STEM design and PBL environments, students often learn through iteration. They test ideas, they encounter obstacles, they revise solutions, and they improve outcomes. And teachers must be prepared to facilitate that process without immediately rescuing students from discomfort. And that requires a complete different instructional mindset than a traditional direct instructional model. I think it's on you, Joseph.
All right. And thank you for that, Dr. Gibson. That's speaking right up a lot of educators' alleys, especially people who train future educators. And just before I delve into this next slide, it I always say this, it amazes me that we are still having to bark up this tree in 2026. Because the literature's there, the research is there on what future ready K through 12 STEM classrooms should look like, how students should be educated, how teachers should be prepared to educate those students. And it amazes me that this still falls on a lot of deaf ears and is still almost seen as a foreign concept in many schools and many education environments. So I just wanted to, I'm gonna step off my soapbox and and get back into, so what does a future ready K through 12 STEM classroom look like? All right. Well, first of all, it's the first word in my head is collaborative, right? Um, Gone are the days where you would have rows and rows of desks all facing forward. That the physical classroom should be a difference maker in terms of getting future ready. All right. It should integrate STEM skills across curricula. These are many sort of repeat ideas, and what you'll find is when we talk about these subjects, you'll hear a lot of the same things because they're all salient. All right, they're all related. Should solve authentic community problems, work collaborative in teams, like I just said. Um, Developing prototypes and solutions. Remember, that goes directly back to project and problem-based learning. Present and defend their thinking, same thing, and reflect and revise continuously, which should go back to engineering design and design thinking process, and so all of these things, these are all sort of, they all come together to create this cohesive, or what should be a cohesive educational experience for both students and teachers. All right. And so, in terms of looking at future ready K through 12 STEM classrooms, there are several examples, and Karen brought up a few really great ones earlier in the presentation. But I mean, we can talk about designing a playground, or have students design a playground that's safe, inclusive, and environmentally friendly on the elementary level. We can talk about middle schoolers creating water filtration systems for communities that lack clean water. We can talk about high schoolers developing sustainable transportation proposals for urban communities. These are but a few examples of what these sort of large, encompassing, inquiry-driven, project and problem-based learning models can deliver for kids. And you just look at these three examples just in a nutshell. They're all based in reality. They're all based in something tangible that affects students every day. And so we all know the literature reflects that once you get students into that realistic realm of education, that when you take away some of the abstract, they become more engaged and more in control of their education. All right, so skills needed for the future workforce, and most people have heard this term 21st century skills, or what other people call soft skills, and so probably, so the origins of this term um, can be traced back to this 1983 Department of Education report called "A Nation at Risk," and what we discovered was that, you can book educate someone to death, and if they do not have these specific soft skills that are needed, then things fall through the cracks inevitably. So employers, the military, Fortune 500, innovation companies, they all said, hey, these are certain across the board skills that students are going to need for the future workforce. All right. Critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, which are known as the sort of the four C's of the 21st century skills. But there are several others that drill down a little deeper. Digital literacy, social responsibility, and culture and global environmental awareness. All of these things sort of work together to create this whole sphere of education. That old adage, developing the whole child. That's what 21st century skills are about. And so going into that, we have to address what equity looks like because we must ask the question, who gets access to innovation, right? Because that's a salient question. That's a pertinent question. It remains to be a pertinent question. It stays a pertinent question. And so historically underserved students are often one, underrepresented in STEM pathways. We've all seen the data. Two, excluded from advanced learning opportunities, and three, more likely to experience passive instruction. Remember what we were talking about earlier is active instruction. What you would find with certain underrepresented populations that do not have access to STEM and PBL, they have that more rote memorization access and of education. And so one of my favorite quotes, and I forget the person who said it, but the world in which we live equally distributes talent, but it doesn't equally distribute opportunity. And that sort of sticks with me in terms of what we're talking about here. And so I'll address some of the numbers. The National Science Foundation put out a report last year called Diversity in STEM, Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities. No, I'm sorry, in 2023. And so what they found is the numbers have been increasing. Well, were increasing at the time of that report. We do not know what the next iteration of that report looks like because some of these diversity programs have been shut down, and so I'm not sure if they're even collecting data like they were before. But as of the previous report, we're looking at numbers like the STEM workforce employs like around 24% of individuals in 2021, up from 20% in 2011. Um, Underrepresented minorities accounted for around 24% of the STEM workforce in 2021, up from 18% in 2011. And representation of women went up from 32% to 35% when comparing 2021 and 2011 numbers. Once again, I will be sorely interested to see what those numbers look like next year or the year after that, just to see if an upward trend is maintained or if it has leveled off or if it has decreased. And so the NAEP, which is the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity Education Foundation, had sort of published an article a few years ago looking at steps to make to better ensure equity in the STEM pipeline. I'll just touch on a couple of a couple of the steps, and you'll see some repeat information because they're really trying to drill it in. Work with institutional leaders, that's administrators, department heads, to improve enrollment, retention, and completion of girls and underrepresented population in STEM courses. Training teachers, and if you're paying attention, this directly goes back to what Dr. Gibson was saying a few slides previous. Training teachers to use pedagogy that improves enrollment, retention, and completion of girls and underrepresented populations in STEM courses. Coaching counselors. So you see, we're looking at this on multiple levels: institutional leaders, administrators, teachers, counselors, encouraging counselors to encourage girls and underrepresented populations in STEM careers, and then to provide those tools. It's one thing to constantly say, "Hey, you guys need to do this. You need to recruit more. You need to do." We have to provide those tools and to assist. And what does that look like? That looks like more substantial non-formal and informal STEM learning opportunities. It might be more funding. It might be a different allocation of funding. whatever works in whatever situation that we're dealing with. But these are some of the main points that or some of the main steps that need to be taken to ensure equity in the STEM pipeline, to make sure that those percentages are going up and not leveling off or going down.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. Um, so right here, we look at partnerships and between higher education and the school system and why they matter. So one of the most essential components of sustaining this work is partnerships. K-12 schools cannot carry the responsibility of innovation alone. And universities and colleges should not operate disconnected from the classroom realities. Strong university school partnership create ecosystems of shared learning and mutual growth. So, for example, universities can support K-12 schools through professional development, STEM innovation labs, curriculum design support, faculty mentorship, research partnerships, clinical teaching opportunities, and more. And at the same time, K-12 educators can provide universities with valuable insight into classroom realities, the needs of their students, the barriers of implementation, and community context. And one powerful example is a residency-based teacher preparation models where teacher candidates spend extensive time embedded inside schools while simultaneously receiving coaching from university faculty and mentor teachers. Another example could involve engineering departments partnering with local schools to host STEM design competitions or even innovation showcases. These type of collaborations help bridge the gap between theory and practice. Also importantly, partnerships also strengthen educator pipelines and create more equitable access to high quality learning opportunities for students. Next slide, please. Right here, we highlight the challenges that higher education must address. And while this work is super exciting, we must be honest about some of those challenges. Transformation, if we're going to be honest, transformation is difficult. Transformation is difficult. Many institutions continue operating within systems originally designed for industrial age models of education rather than innovation-driven learning environments. Some faculty have limited exposure to interdisciplinary STEM integration or even authentic project facilitation themselves. So schools face testing pressures, accountability demands, staffing shortages, and resource limitations. And sometimes systems unintentionally prioritize compliance over creativity. But moments like this require us to ask difficult institutional questions. Are we preparing educators for the realities of modern classrooms? Or are we preparing students to solve future problems or simply memorize existing information? Or are we building systems that encourage innovation or suppress it? These are not small questions. They are required institutionally for courage, leadership, and willingness to rethink long-standing assumptions about teaching and learning. Next slide, please, Dr. Joseph. So my call to action or our call to action to you is about building future-ready systems. As I could prepare to conclude, let me just say this. I want to leave us with the central idea of transforming K-12 education requires system collaboration across the entire educational pipeline. Higher education institutions must redesign teacher preparation to include more experiential learning, more interdisciplinary collaboration, more authentic community engagement, and more um, opportunities to for innovation and inquiry. K-12 schools must also continue creating environments where creativity, exploration, and problem solving are prioritized along academic rigor. And policymakers, researchers, administrators, and community leaders must collectively support these efforts because future ready classrooms do not just emerge accidentally. They are intentionally designed through vision, partnership, investment, and preparation. And so ultimately, the future of education depends on whether we are willing to move beyond outdated instructional models and prepare students not only simply to succeed in the future, but really be very intentional about preparing students to shape the future because that's important. And I personally, I as a scholar practitioner, in this space, I believe we're standing at an important moment in education. And if we are serious about preparing students for the future, then we must also be serious about redesigning the systems that prepare educators themselves. Um, Again, the future classroom is not simply about technology or innovation for innovation's sake. It's about cultivating environments where students are empowered to think deeply, solve problems creatively, and collaborate meaningfully, and also contribute boldly to the entire world around them. Thank you, Karen. Next slide, please, Dr. Joseph.
Okay, so sorry, I was on mute. So, questions to consider. How can higher education institutions better prepare future educators for authentic STEM and inquiry driven learning? What barriers continue to limit high quality project based learning implementation in schools? How can universities and K 12 systems build stronger partnerships that create sustainable impact? And perhaps most importantly, what does equitable access to innovative learning truly look like in practice? These questions are for us to ponder, to think about, and really to come up with a solution and an answer to these questions. And it will depend not only on innovative ideas, but on our collective ability to implement them intentionally, equitably, and collaboratively. It will be important, and the future is in our hands for us to do just that. Next slide, please. As we close out, we want to thank you for the time that you took to listen to our presentation today. And we hope that there's another one coming where we can have folks that talk about this work in action. Thank you very much. If there are questions, we're going to open the floor right now and we will take questions.
And also, Karen, don't forget to remind them about our QR codes.
Yes, and we do have QR codes. My apologies. For our events page, also our heroes page, and please provide feedback on the webinar feedback form. Again, thank you so much. The floor is now open. Should you have questions for any of us, or if you would just like to share information about your experience in the STEM education space.
There are multiple ways you can share your thoughts or ask questions. One is using the Q&A box, another is using the chat, and another is raising your hand to come off mute. So don't be shy. Something I've been thinking about as you've given this brilliant talk is we talk about equity and equitability built into learning systems. How do we resolve, our goals for equity and access with some of the structural inequities that exist at the institutional levels in terms of inequitable funding across K through 12 institutions or inequitable funding across higher education institutions for capacity? That's a big question.
Yeah.
It is.
That's a that yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah,
A
that
chewing
is a
on.
big one, and that's why you really have to look at diversifying opportunities and looking at other opportunities to provide funding to support the work that you want to do.
Well, let me just tap at it again. We certainly must be intentional with moving from, I guess, equality to equity, and we must be intentional about redesigning access to opportunity. So, many students in K-12 are excluded from advanced STEM courses, gifted programs, robotics and coding, thinking like that. In higher education, students face issues such as financial barriers, technology gaps, and things of those natures. Additionally, we must be intentional with the preparation for teacher and faculty, and then relationships matter. And then even when we think about the grant space, we have to be agencies and organizations. Well, let me back up. Even educators in the higher ed space and the K-12 space have to be intentional about seeking those funds that are available, that are out there. And then they have to be intentional with following up with some of the program officers, some of the funding organizations about what that looks like. And so to sum all of this up, to answer your question, or to take a stab at your question rather, it's really about being very intentional and really having a strong strategy.
Thank you so much.
And another thing, I think oftentimes people put folks in, they allow them to have an experience based on grades and grade point average. But I know of a case where someone was not doing very well, but they were put in a space um, that exposed them. And because of that exposure, it really turned them around academically. So I think we also need to look at not pigeonholing students based on grades, because sometimes exposure can do a lot to innovate and motivate a student who may have been floundering, and then they're exposed to something that they never had been exposed to before, and it just stimulates their curiosity, and it can turn them around. So I think we need to start looking at things a little differently in terms of who gets exposed to what.
Karen, I think that's a brilliant statement because I've always been one, and I look at my background of where I came from, and grew up in a low income environment. Let's just say that, urban low income environment, and there was a lack of exposure to certain things. And I go back and I look at some of the people, and I guess I still get to follow some people via the social media spaces and things that I went to high school with in middle school. And I look back and look at some of their exposures, what they did not get. And some of them um, are in some of the same spaces where they were, and some of the career choices that they have. Maybe that's, and no, nothing against it. It's just like retail and things like that in the area. And I'm incredibly grateful because I had exposure. And one of the things that I got exposure, there was a through a grant from the Department of Ed was the a TRIO grant, a pre-college program, and it exposed me to what college was like. So now, when you get to college for the first time, you're meeting people from all over the U.S. And who has different interests and different likes. Now you're exploring different majors and things that you didn't even know existed. Now you're getting connected to different clubs and different programs and extracurricular. Now you're seeing scholarship, you're learning about research, you're learning about statistics and qualitative and all these amazing things. Now, then even more, I even look at the students who go and decide to major in business because they get the most exposure because they're literally engaging with accounting and they're engaging with major organizations like JP Morgan and things like that. So they get those type of experiences. But even if you're not in business, just across the field, just looking at STEM and for students that study biology and chemistry, then go on to med school and become dentists and all those type of things. And so exposure is so critical. My heart goes out for those that don't get a level of exposure because then they don't see what's out there.
Yep.
They don't get those opportunities. And so that's a really good, and I'm glad you brought that up because
Yes.
that's so important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mm. Yes.
So
Yes.
there's something in the chat about educating the parents is
Yes.
equally important. And that's very true because if
That's very,
parents
Yes.
don't know about the opportunities, then they can expose their
Yep.
children and help the children grow. And then we as educators too need to do a better job of helping our parents
Mhm.
understand the processes and how to get their kids in spaces that will help them grow and learn and do better and be better.
and so that's why it's important that our schools have career days and things like that where they can come and hear from other people in other spaces so you can see what it's like to to be in this space, be in this career, or even if and I don't know what, I mean, I'm sure everybody's budget is different, but even if they have an opportunity just to travel into certain spaces and see what certain careers are like, even they can have like a hands-on day or whatever so that they know, wow, I really do, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a chemist, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a dentist, I want to be a researcher, I want to be a scholar. But just having those opportunities to really engage in innovation, that makes a
Mhm.
difference.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
has to be a
absolutely.
collaborative, communal effort.
Mm,
And, we keep saying the same thing, but it's really like when you drill down, it's really that simple. Like you have to, like it's a complicated like simplicity. That's the way I call it. And and I'll go to the quote unquote powers that be. They have to have the courage to 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 want to make these changes and instill these edicts to move the needle forward. It takes courage. It really does. It's not really just especially in this day and age. Because it's easy to get your hand slapped once you start speaking out. Uh, and so to be able to stand on your laurels and not rest on them, that's an important thing.
That's good. And think about your first time on an airplane. Or think
mhm,
about if for the first time you traveled internationally. I remember the first time I got on the airplane and took a 16-hour flight to Africa. And my mind was blown because I got a chance to explore something that I would have never imagined. And then from Africa, then I wanted to go to South Africa. I wanted to go to Brazil. Then I wanted to go to Greece and all these things just because of that level of exposure that I had
mhm,
on the plane. And I saw the world and they say the world is a book, and you will stay in that book if you don't turn the page. You'll stay on
mhm,
the page if you don't turn it. And so all of this is important. So I, I go back. That goes back to saying it's so important that higher education is so intentional with the K-12 spaces,
mhm,
making sure that they have the tools of innovation, They have the tools of strategy. They have the tools of collaboration. And then that they show the K-12 segments or as they're preparing the teachers ways to be innovative and take their classrooms to transform the lives of their students in a whole nother way than they ever imagined.
We have a great comment in the chat. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. However, because of the circles they were invited to, they gained knowledge to equip me and my siblings who became first generation college students.
Wow.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Beautiful.
That's
Thank
that's
you.
very powerful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Once again, thank you for a really enlightening conversation. I learned new concepts and new frameworks. I thank you so much for coming today and presenting. I want to encourage our participants to visit the QEM events page to sign up for future webinars, and we hope to see you again. I want to thank our presenters once again, and we hope everybody has a great rest of day and a wonderful weekend. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thanks to all.